Welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be a little bit more chilled out because there's so much hype and clickbait and all of that about this topic. The topic is, will the housing market crash next year? So in this video, I'm going to teach you how to evaluate housing markets. I'm going to teach you about submarkets within the housing market. And then at the very end, I'll give you what my opinion is on my market. I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and I'll give you my take on this market, but more importantly, I'll tell you why I think that. So stay tuned, let's get into it. So let's start with housing markets. What exactly is the housing market that everybody talks about? Well, of course, you have a national housing market. But let me tell you, even during the worst of times, some markets in the United States grew. Yeah, there were a lot that pulled back, but if you paid attention, some markets actually grew. So how does that happen? How can you have a horrible marketplace where some markets still grow, and even in this booming market that we have today, how are there some markets that are still suffering? So let's talk about what that actually means. So my personal take, and this is an opinion, is that all real estate is local. So I know a lot about the Columbus, Ohio market. I can then tell you about submarkets within the Columbus market. And then I can tell you about neighborhoods within those submarkets. So to break it down, you have a national housing market, you have a state market, then you have these local markets that are like Columbus or rural Ohio or Cleveland or Cincinnati. Then within Columbus, we have areas, so like where I live is on the southern Delaware County market of the bigger Columbus market. And then you have cities like Dublin, that's a suburb. You have downtown Columbus. Each one of those are submarkets. And then within those submarkets, you have even smaller neighborhoods. All of that plays into what you should look at when you're trying to evaluate what's going to happen to the real estate market that everybody talks about. So let's take an example. During the big recession, sure, the housing market dropped off. Now, Columbus, Ohio was more fortunate than some areas. We only dropped off about 10, maybe 11% as a whole market. Now, areas within Columbus, if you're familiar with the area, places like Dublin, places like southern Delaware County, where I'm sitting right now, places, some of the suburbs, still performed very well. Now, were they going at the same rate before the recession? No, but they were still growing. The downtown markets took a real beating. Some of the suburbs took a real beating. Now, a lot of that is driven by the consumer's desire to live in a particular place. One of the biggest of those is school districts. There's different perceptions out there. I'm not here to pass judgment on whether it's a good school district or a bad school district. It's what the perception is in the public. So that drives a lot of what that market becomes when times go bad. And boy, does it ever drive it when times are good. So for example, even in this booming market, there are certain areas of Columbus that aren't growing as fast as the market as a whole. So what does that mean to you? And what does it mean when you're thinking about, should I buy something? Should I maybe wait? Should I hold off? Well, now let's jump into that part of it. So the question becomes, should I buy a house now? Should I wait for this miraculous crash that everybody's clickbaiting? Should I wait for the market to adjust, maybe balance out a little bit? Should I wait? Well, here's the magic question you want to ask yourself. What's it going to cost me to wait? Now, what I mean by that, if the housing market in your area is going up like Columbus. Columbus is going up right now at about 11%, probably the biggest growth that we have seen in the Columbus market since anybody can remember. Now, Is it going to continue to grow at 11% or will that moderate? So let's say that you're an investor and you want to make a decision as to when you want to start building your portfolio. Well, obviously, same as the traditional home buyer, one of the important factors that's going to play into it is going to be the interest rate that you're going to pay on the money. So unless you're going out and paying cash for your entire portfolio, interest rates are a strong determining factor. Plus, interest rates also drive the market conditions because people can buy more when the interest rates are low. But here's the secret to investors. A good deal is a good deal, whether it's in a booming market, whether it's in a down market, doesn't matter. So unlike the traditional home buyer that is purchasing a home for their own use, investors don't necessarily look only at that. A good deal is a good deal no matter what. If the property is going to cash flow, it doesn't matter if you bought it in 2011 or you are buying it today. It makes zero difference because the property is still going to cash flow. So now let's jump into some of the other factors that are going to play into this real estate market crash that everybody's talking about. So let's say that you're an investor and you want to make a decision as to when you want to start building your portfolio. Well, obviously, same as the traditional home buyer, one of the important factors that's going to play into it is going to be the interest rate that you're going to pay on the money. So unless you're going out and paying cash for your entire portfolio, interest rates are a strong determining factor. Plus, interest rates also drive the market conditions because people can buy more when the interest rates are low. But here's the secret to investors. A good deal is a good deal, whether it's in a booming market, whether it's in a down market, doesn't matter. So unlike the traditional home buyer that is purchasing a home for their own use, investors don't necessarily look only at that. A good deal is a good deal no matter what. If the property is going to cash flow, it doesn't matter if you bought it in 2011 or you are buying it today. It makes zero difference because the property is still going to cash flow. So now let's jump into some of the other factors that are going to play into this real estate market crash that everybody's talking about. So what are the other factors that play into whether the real estate market is going to go up or go down? So let's talk about nationally. So generally speaking, we're adding population within the United States. So of course, there's going to be more demand for housing down the road. If you look at how the population has grown, the number of people turning adult age, all of those things play into it. But more importantly than population growth is what's called household formation. Now this is a little bit of economics, a little bit of wonky stuff here, okay? But generally speaking, when someone is either forming a family or moving out of their home or graduating college or establishing a household of their own, it's not necessarily someone getting married. It's when the people are in a position to occupy a housing unit. That's called a family formation, okay? So those things really play into it. So now let's talk about the realities of what we're looking at ahead. The millennial generation. Everybody's heard the stories about the millennials. I will almost guarantee the majority of people watching this video are millennials. The largest generation that we have ever seen as a group. Now, what are the traits of the millennial generation versus past history? So, quite frankly, they're not as different as people would make you believe. The millennial generation is still purchasing homes at the same rate once they form the household that I talked about. But here's the catch. They're just a couple years later in forming those households. They're a little bit later in when they decide to start having children. They might be a little bit later in when they decide to start looking to get married. But once that household is formed, all the numbers are fitting exactly into what the past numbers were. There was a lot of speculation when this generation came of age and they weren't buying houses as fast, and everybody freaked out, did the clickbait headlines. But here's the reality. The reality is that once that, the millennials have been faced with some challenges that my generation wasn't. But once that things start to settle down, once they get settled into the job, once all those things came about, the numbers of people who want to own homes and the ones that are buying homes are the same as what it's been in generations past. So now let's talk about migration. So now let's talk about another factor, and that is migration. So, as you may have heard, the state of California lost population in the past 10 years. Now, that population has moved for various reasons and moved to different parts of the country. The city of Columbus, Ohio has seen an increase in the amount of inbound migration from other parts of the country. When those things occur, that obviously impacts the housing market. Now, for example, in California, where there was a massive shortage of homes to begin with, the loss of population has not impacted the housing market. Here in Columbus, Ohio, where we are massively short of homes, with more people moving in, all of a sudden that's made the housing market much, much tighter. And then when you look at specific areas of Columbus, those submarkets and those neighborhoods that I talked about earlier, certain people are gravitating to those areas, which is just making the housing crunch in those neighborhoods and in those submarkets even stronger. Now, what does all of this mean to you when you're making a decision about purchasing a home or starting an investment portfolio? Number one, look at your individual market, whether it be a rural market, whether it be a city market, state, I don't care. But you want to look at your market. Don't worry about the national market. The national market will only be impacted by things like interest rates, like housing stock numbers, like population, and all of those are outside of your control. There's nothing that says that you can control just by what you buy or what you don't buy. However, when you start getting into submarkets, when you start getting into specific neighborhoods and you look at those neighborhoods, look at how long the houses are sitting on the market, that's going to tell you how popular the neighborhood is, right? So if houses are flying off the listing service and they're going away at, 5 days, 10 days, even 15 days, keep in mind the average amount of time that a property is on the market is 120 days. So if the property is flying off the shelf in 20 days, okay, that's a good market. If it's flying off the shelf in 2 days, that's an extremely strong market, okay? Also, you want to look at where your priorities are. So if you are in a market where you're having to pay this huge rental amount, and you can go buy a property that is similar or better, and you're able to purchase it for less money, and you're stable in your job, you're not going to be transferred across the country in the next 3 months, it's probably a good idea to buy. If, on the other hand, your boss has said, hey, any moment we could transfer you to another state, or we could transfer you out of country, then obviously you want to take that into consideration when you're thinking about buying. Now, how do you hedge that? You can purchase a home that you could turn into investment property later. Military people have done that for years, but I'll make a separate video about that. So, where does this all boil down, and how do we kind of pull it into a nice little ball? Basically, all of these hype videos that are out there talking about the coming market crash or the this or the that, here's my philosophy. These people have correctly picked 100 of the last 2 recessions. Now that's kind of a joke and a play on words. They've predicted recessions 100 times, and they've been right twice. That's a pretty bad track record if you ask me. More importantly is, are they teaching you how to evaluate it for yourself. I think it's important that you make decisions from your own educated perspective. Now, I promised that I'd give you my opinion on the Columbus, Ohio market, and we'll jump into that right now. So, okay, anytime I'm making advice type situations, I have to make a little disclaimer. This is generalized information. The specific information that applies to you, you should be talking to your real estate professional, your CPAs, in making decisions. With that being said, let me give you my take on the greater Columbus market and what I'm telling my clients. So number one, I'm telling each client that they are different. Every person's situation is different. I've done thousands of real estate deals. Not one was the same, not one client was the same. In fact, I've sold many homes to investors. Not one of those deals were the same, even though the client was the same. You have to evaluate it based upon your individual needs. So that out of the way. The Columbus, Ohio market is currently about 50 to 60,000 homes short, meaning that if miraculously out of the sky 50 to 60,000 homes just dropped and all of a sudden landed in Columbus, we would be about balanced. Okay? The easiest way to evaluate that is you look at the number of homes that have been sold over the last year, and then you look at the number of homes that are on the market. That creates what's called an absorption rate. That's a fancy term for just the amount of inventory. So during the summer, we were down as low in some price points, we were down as low as 4 days of inventory. Balanced market is 6 months of inventory. So 4 days is obviously an extremely, extremely tight real estate market. So the real estate headlines say inventory doubles. Well, yeah, we're up to about 9 or 10 days right now in those same price points. The market as a whole in Columbus, we're sitting on roughly 20 days worth of inventory. 6 months is balanced. So obviously it's a seller's market. Now, there's still, the killer part is, even though we're in this booming real estate market, there's still some value to be had in certain purchases and in certain strategies. Now, we will make all kinds of videos talking about these strategies, but in the end, just be aware that even in the most booming real estate market, you can find value. And even in the best buyer's market in the world, you can definitely step on your tail. Okay? So, I've tried to make this video with as little hype as I possibly can, because I really, really want people to understand and be educated on how to evaluate their situation, instead of listening to all the hype beasts out there that are putting up the clickbait headlines, and it just drives me nuts. So if you have enjoyment of this video, please press the like button. Please subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you in the next video.